I'm going to explain the concept of the ISLM framework, which is an economic framework used to analyze fiscal and monetary policies. The practical origin of this framework can be looked back in the 1989 when the US government, through its Federal Reserve Bank, was blamed by the people that it had put tight monetary policies in terms of money growth and interest rates. So this caused a prolonged recession during that period. And on another practical example, in the 1991, the US government was also blamed for failure to cut sharp the interest rates, which made the recession or the economic decrease in economic activities or growth to be longer than expected. So in this video we are going to explain how this model came about and the practical examples related to the model, examples of monetary and fiscal policies using graphical illustrations, and we are also going to tackle a typical exam question which might be useful to students, especially at the undergraduate level. The introduction of the framework. In order to understand the framework, we need to first of all look at the national income accounting equation. So this is an equation that explains the components of economic growth using GDP or using total income in an economy like Malawi. So the total income or GDP shall be denoted using a Y, so that the total income or the total GDP rather is equal to C plus I plus G plus the net exports. So the Y is total income. Total income or total GDP or economic growth depends on total consumption expenditures, total investment expenditures, total government purchases or expenditures, and the difference between exports and imports, which is the net exports, the NX. For now, we shall keep the understanding of total income or total output of a country by simply assuming that there is no international trade taking place, so that we do not have the component of net exports or trade balance. It is also interesting, before we further explain these components, to note that the total investments in equilibrium are the same as or are equal to total savings, so that this expression can also be written as total consumption expenditures plus total savings plus total government purchases. So on condition that total investments are equal to total savings in equilibrium. For now, again, we shall assume that consumption can be expressed using income function, and also investments can also be further explained using an interest rate function. So consumption, total consumption, could be equal to autonomous consumption, which is C bar, plus another level of consumption that depends on the level of income, the CYD, and this income is disposable income. That's why we are using D to imply that it is disposable income. So total consumption is a linear function of income plus some level of consumption that is autonomous, or that does not depend on the levels of income. The YD, which is disposable income, is simply total income minus taxes. So the income that can be usually used to buy goods and services, the income that is free of taxes, free of VAT, free of pay as you earn if it's a salary, that income can be disposed of, and that is what is called a disposable income. Again, we can explain total investments, like total investments expenditures, the I, using a function of investments. We shall assume that we have a certain level of investments that does not depend on anything. Especially, we know that investments are usually affected by interest rates, because we assume in economics that for people to invest, for firms to invest, they will have to borrow. So the cost of borrowing is the interest rate. And when the interest rates are high, we expect investments to be low, because the higher the interest rate, the more it is to borrow, the more expensive it is to borrow from financial intermediaries like banks and invest. So this will lower down the levels of investments, and hence we are using the negative sign here to mean that the level of investments that depends on interest rates will negatively or reduce the investments, especially when the interest rates are high. So total investments will equal to autonomous investments, the I bar, minus that level of investments that depends on interest rates. So the B is measuring the sensitivity of total investments to changes in the levels of interest rates, the marginal propensity to invest. And the I is the actual interest rate that will dictate the levels of investments in the economy. So from our shortened total income, C plus I plus G, assuming that the economy is in autarky, or it is not engaging in trade with international partners or countries, where we are omitting the NEX, we can replace this total income equation, the national income accounting equation, Y is equal to C plus I plus G. We are going to replace the values of total consumption expenditure and that of total investments expenditure in order to formulate or to have the full equation by taking care of the other factors, especially income and interest rates, which are likely going to affect consumption and investments respectively. So putting it into perspective, then our equation becomes Y is equal to, where we have C, we are going to put C bar plus CYD, where C bar, remember, is the autonomous consumption, or the level of consumption that does not depend on the levels of income. And the CYD, the level of consumption that depends on the disposable income. And where we have the I, we are going to replace with what I is from the function of investments, which is I bar minus BI. And then in this equation, we are remaining with the G, so plus G. At this point in time, we will also assume that the government expenditure, even though it does not have a function, but is autonomous. So yes, government expenditure is also autonomous at the moment, to simplify our understanding. So we have three autonomous terms. We have C bar, which is autonomous consumption. You know that level of consumption that does not depend on the levels of income. Maybe people might be asking, well, what do I mean by that? So imagine somebody who does not have any penny, and or they are not employed, they do not earn any income. But you might be wondering how they finance their consumption. So they might be financing their consumption from borrowing or through other ways and means. So you have zero income, but you are still able to get food. Where do you get the food? You are still able to, clothe yourself, even new clothes. So even though somebody does not have an income, but there could be some levels, some minimum thresholds of consumption that they may not do without, even though they have zero incomes. That could be looked at as the autonomous consumption. So 3 autonomous terms here: consumption, C bar, investments, I bar, and the G bar, the autonomous government spending or expenditure. So allow me to group these autonomous terms as one, to have total autonomous expenditure. So I will put all those 3 terms as A bar. So the A bar is a summation of the C bar, the I bar, and the G bar here. So that I'm remaining with CYD plus, rather should be minus the PI. So this can be looked at as our total income in the economy, that we have total autonomous expenditures, which is the sum of total consumption, total investments, and the government expenditure as autonomous. Then we have the level of consumption, total consumption, that depends on the level of income, and that level of investments that also depends on interest rates.